Sarah Matthews gripped the leather steering wheel of her silver BMW as thick white smoke erupted from beneath the hood. The engine had sputtered, coughed violently, and then died completely, forcing her to coast onto the shoulder of Interstate 95. She checked her phone. 8:32 a.m. Her stomach dropped. The board presentation Euro, the one that would determine the fate of her talent acquisition strategy, the project she'd spent 6 months developing Euro, was scheduled to start in 28 minutes at Meridian Motors headquarters downtown. Sarah had rehearsed her pitch dozens of times, refined every slide, anticipated every question. But none of her meticulous planning had prepared her for this moment. Stranded on a highway with smoke billowing from her expensive car like a distress signal. With trembling fingers, she dialed roadside assistance. The dispatcher's apologetic voice delivered the crushing news, at least 90 minutes before a tow truck could reach her location. Sarah ended the call and pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the tears of frustration that threatened to ruin her carefully applied makeup. 5 years of building her reputation at Meridian Motors, of proving herself in a male-dominated corporate environment, and it could all crumble because of a mechanical failure. She loosened the silk scarf around her neck, suddenly feeling suffocated despite the crisp October morning air. Her phone pinged mockingly with a calendar reminder. Board presentation, 9 a.m., conference room A. The crunch of tires on gravel made Sarah look up. An old Ford pickup truck, its blue paint faded and weathered by years of sun and hard work, pulled up behind her disabled BMW. The contrast between the two vehicles was stark. Euro, her sleek luxury sedan, and this working man's truck that had clearly seen better days. A tall man emerged from the driver's side, moving with an unhurried, confident stride. He wore faded jeans with honest dirt stains, a plain gray t-shirt that had been washed so many times the fabric looked soft, and work boots that had walked many miles. His face was weathered but kind, with laugh lines around warm brown eyes that immediately put Sarah at ease despite her urban instincts screaming caution. Sarah hesitated, then lowered her window halfway. Euro, enough to communicate, but still maintaining a barrier. The man stopped a respectful distance from her car, not crowding her space. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a gentle southern drawl that reminded Sarah of her grandfather. "Looks like you're having some trouble there." His eyes moved to the smoke still escaping from under her hood, assessing the situation with what appeared to be professional expertise. "My car just died," Sarah explained, trying to keep the frustration from her voice. "I've called for assistance, but they won't be here for at least an hour and a half. I have an extremely important meeting that I'm already going to miss." She heard the defeat in her own words and hated it. The man nodded thoughtfully, his gaze moving over her BMW with the practiced eye of someone intimately familiar with vehicles. "Mind if I take a look? I'm pretty good with engines. Name's Mike, by the way. Mike Reynolds." He said it simply, without boasting, just stating a fact. Something about his demeanor, the quiet confidence, the lack of pushiness, the respectful distance he maintained, Euro, made Sarah trust him, which surprised her. She had been taught to be cautious, especially as a woman alone on a highway. "I'm Sarah," she replied, making a split-second decision. She stepped out of her car, smoothing her designer pencil skirt. "Sarah Matthews, I would honestly appreciate any help you can offer. That meeting I mentioned, it could make or break my career." She didn't know why she was sharing this with a complete stranger, but something about Mike's genuine concern invited honesty. Mike nodded seriously, as if he understood the weight of important moments that could shift the trajectory of a life. He gestured toward her hood. "Let's see what we got here." Sarah pressed the hood release, and Mike propped it open, immediately stepping back as a cloud of steam billowed out. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms marked with old scars, burns, and calluses. Euro, the hands of someone who had spent a lifetime working with machinery, not just as a hobby, but as a way of life. Mike leaned over the engine, his movements deliberate and practiced. Sarah watched, fascinated despite her anxiety, as his hands moved with the confidence of a surgeon. Euro, touching, testing, listening. He was nothing like the mechanics at her dealership with their spotless uniforms, computerized diagnostic equipment, and corporate politeness. This was someone who had an intimate, almost instinctive understanding of how machines worked. After several minutes of careful examination, Mike straightened up and met Sarah's anxious gaze. "You've got a failed water pump, which caused your cooling system to overheat. Looks like you might also have a clogged fuel filter contributing to the problem. The good news is I can fix it. The not-so-good news is it'll take some €2, probably 2 to 2.5 hours if I have the right parts in my truck." He pulled a worn rag from his back pocket and wiped his hands. "I carry basic supplies for emergencies like this. Helped more than a few stranded folks over the years." Sarah checked her watch again. 8:47 a.m. Her presentation was now impossible to make on time. She felt her carefully constructed professional composure cracking. Mike studied her expression with surprising empathy. "Listen, I completely understand if you'd rather wait for the professionals. No offense taken. I know how it looks a stranger on a highway offering help. But I promise you I know what I'm doing, and I'd like to help if you'll let me." Sarah made a rapid calculation. The roadside assistance would take at least 90 minutes to arrive, and then they would likely just tow her car to a dealership where it might sit for days waiting for parts and service. This man was offering her a solution right now. "Please," she said, hearing the desperation in her voice. "If you can fix it, I will be incredibly grateful." Mike nodded once, a subtle gesture that somehow conveyed commitment and competence. He returned to his truck and came back carrying a weathered metal toolbox that looked like it had seen decades of use, along with various parts wrapped in clean rags. Sarah immediately called her assistant, Mark, instructing him to stall the board meeting if possible, or at minimum to distribute her presentation materials and apologize for her absence. She explained about the car trouble, hearing the disappointment in Mark's voice when he realized she wouldn't make it. "I'll do what I can, Sarah," he said, "but you know how the board feels about punctuality." Disconnecting the call, Sarah watched as Mike set up his workspace with the efficiency of someone who had done this countless times. He laid out his tools in a specific order, positioned parts within easy reach, and approached the disabled engine like a puzzle he was eager to solve. His hands moved with practiced precision, removing the damaged water pump, checking connections, testing components. Sarah found herself mesmerized by the quiet competence of his work. "You seem to know exactly what you're doing," she observed, leaning against her car. The morning sun was climbing higher, and the initial panic was giving way to resignation about the meeting. There was nothing she could do now except trust this stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't quite finished praying. Mike glanced up briefly, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "I should hope so. Been working on engines since I was 14 years old. My grandfather had a repair shop in Georgia. Spent every summer of my childhood in that garage, learning everything he could teach me." He didn't elaborate further, focusing instead on carefully removing a corroded component that was clearly past its useful life. "What do you do now?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "Do you own a repair shop?" Mike's hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing their work. "These days I do a bit of everything. Odd jobs mostly. Whatever needs fixing." There was something in his tone that suggested a story he wasn't quite ready to tell, and Sarah respected his privacy enough not to push. The morning sun climbed higher as Mike worked with steady determination. Occasionally he would ask Sarah to try starting the engine or to retrieve a specific tool from his truck. She found herself enjoying these small tasks, feeling useful rather than helpless. Her phone buzzed periodically with messages from colleagues, but she found herself more interested in watching this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to rescue her. Nearly 2 hours later, Mike straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. His gray t-shirt was now stained with grease and sweat, and there was a smudge of oil on his cheek that he seemed completely unaware of. "That should do it," he announced with quiet satisfaction, closing the hood with a solid thunk that sounded healthy and final. "Try starting her up now." Sarah slid into the driver's seat, holding her breath as she turned the key. The engine purred to life immediately, running smoother than it had in weeks, maybe months. The sound was clean and strong, without the hesitation and roughness she had grown accustomed to ignoring. Relief washed over her in a wave, so powerful, almost brought tears to her eyes. She stepped out of the car, her hand already reaching for her purse. "I cannot thank you enough," she said earnestly, pulling out her wallet. "Please, let me pay you for your time and the parts. You've saved me hours of hassle and possibly salvaged my career, even if I missed this morning's presentation." She held out several $100 bills, knowing it was probably less than the repair was worth, but hoping it would at least cover his time and materials. To her complete surprise, Mike shook his head, his work-roughened hands raised in polite but firm refusal. "No need for that, ma'am. I was happy to help. Just glad I happened to be driving by when you needed it." There was no false modesty in his voice, just simple sincerity. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Please," she insisted, still holding out the money. "You spent over 2 hours fixing my car. This is the least I can do. You must let me compensate you." She pushed the bills toward him more insistently. Something shifted in Mike's expression, a flash of quiet pride that Sarah recognized immediately. She had seen it before in people who had known hard times, people for whom dignity was more important than money. "I genuinely appreciate the offer. I really do," Mike said gently but firmly. "But I don't need payment for helping someone in trouble. That's just being a decent human being." He glanced at his watch, an old Timex with a scratch face that looked like it had survived many repairs of its own. "Though I'll admit, I'm pretty hungry. Haven't had a chance to eat breakfast this morning, and I need to pick up my daughter from her friend's house soon. She stayed over last night for a birthday sleepover." Sarah suddenly remembered the lunch she had packed that morning, a turkey and avocado sandwich on artisanal bread from the expensive deli near her apartment, along with an apple and some gourmet chips. It seemed absurdly inadequate compensation for what Mike had done, but his mention of hunger touched something in her heart. "Would you accept a sandwich?" she asked, retrieving the neatly wrapped package from her bag. "It's not much, certainly not equal to what you've done for me, but it's fresh." The way Mike looked at the offered sandwich made Sarah's chest tighten. There was genuine gratitude in his expression, but also something else, a flash of vulnerability that suggested this simple sandwich might mean more to him than she realized. "That's mighty kind of you, ma'am," he said, accepting the package with careful hands, as if it were something precious. More than fair trade in my book. There was something about his dignified acceptance, the careful way he held the sandwich, that touched Sarah deeply. This man had spent hours helping a complete stranger, asking for absolutely nothing in return, and seemed genuinely grateful for a simple lunch. On impulse, she reached in her purse and pulled out her business card, a heavy cardstock with raised lettering that announced her position: Sarah Matthews, Director of Human Resources, Meridian Motors. "If you ever need anything," she said, handing him the card, "anything at all, please don't hesitate to contact me. I mean that sincerely. I owe you a debt I can't possibly repay with money or sandwiches." Her voice caught slightly on the last words, surprising herself with the emotion she felt. Mike tucked the card carefully into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. "That's very generous of you, Miss Matthews. I hope I won't need to take you up on it, but I appreciate the gesture more than you know." He smiled warmly. "You'd better get going. Maybe you can still salvage part of your day. And Sarah, drive safe now. That car should run fine, but if you have any problems, any at all, you call me. My number's on the back of that card I should have given you." He pulled out a worn business card of his own, simple, no frills, just Mike Reynolds with a phone number handwritten at the bottom. Sarah accepted it, noting how different it was from her own embossed corporate card. She thanked him once more, feeling like mere words were completely inadequate, before getting into her car and pulling back onto the highway. As she drove toward downtown, watching Mike's faded blue truck disappear in her rearview mirror, Sarah realized that in the 2 hours they had spent together, he had never once asked what her important meeting was about, never pried in her personal life, never made her feel uncomfortable or obligated. He had simply helped because that's who he was, a genuinely good person in a world that seemed increasingly short on such people. Sarah arrived at Meridian Motors headquarters at 10:47 a.m., nearly 2 hours late for her presentation. The sleek glass and steel building that usually filled her with professional pride now seemed to mock her failure. She hurried through the lobby, nodding distractedly at colleagues, and rushed to her office to find Mark waiting with an anxious expression. The board was not happy, he said bluntly. Mr. Harrison in particular was very vocal about professional courtesy and respect for everyone's time. I distributed your materials and explained about your car breaking down, but he trailed off, the implication clear. Sarah sank into her desk chair, feeling the weight of the morning crash down on her. 6 months of work, potentially wasted because of a mechanical failure and her bad luck. But even as disappointment settled in her chest, she found herself thinking about Mike Reynolds, about his kindness and skill, about the way he had refused payment and been grateful for a sandwich. That evening, sitting in her modern apartment overlooking the city skyline, surrounded by expensive furniture and prestigious art that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless, Sarah found herself unable to stop thinking about the man who had helped her. She pulled his simple business card from her purse and stared at the handwritten phone number. On impulse, she opened her laptop and typed Mike Reynolds into a search engine. The common name yielded thousands of results. Euro, too many to be useful. Sarah tried adding Georgia based on his mention of his grandfather's shop, then automotive and engineer. Nothing specific appeared. She sat back, frustrated, and then remembered the license plate on his truck. It was a long shot, but Sarah had cultivated connections throughout the automotive industry during her years in HR, including friendly relationships with people who had access to DMV records. A few discreet phone calls to contacts who owed her favors, and by 9 p.m. that evening, Sarah had Mike's full name, address, and more. Michael James Reynolds, age 36, lived in a modest apartment complex called Oakwood Gardens on the outskirts of the city Euro, far from Sarah's upscale neighborhood of high-rises and trendy restaurants. But it was what else she discovered that truly shocked her. Further investigation revealed something that made Sarah's heart race with excitement and disbelief. Michael James Reynolds wasn't just a handyman who fixed cars on the side. He had previously been a senior mechanical engineer at Continental Automotive, one of Meridian Motors' primary competitors. She found his name on patents, saw his presentations at industry conferences, read glowing performance reviews that had somehow made their way into public records during a company merger. This man had been on track to become a department head, possibly even a VP of engineering. His specialty? Electric vehicle propulsion systems Euro, exactly the area where Meridian was currently struggling and pouring millions into development. Yet 3 years ago, Michael Reynolds had abruptly left Continental Automotive, and his employment history since then was spotty at best. Euro, a series of short-term contract jobs, freelance repair work, nothing that matched his qualifications or potential. What had happened? Why would someone with such impressive credentials abandon a promising career? The answer came in the form of a local newspaper article Sarah found while searching deeper. The headline read, "Local engineer loses wife to cancer, raises daughter alone." The photograph accompanying the story showed a slightly younger Mike, his arm around a small girl with his same kind eyes and a smile that looked like it took effort. The article, written for a charity fundraiser 2 years earlier, explained how Michael Reynolds had left his demanding corporate position to care for his 8-year-old daughter Emma after his wife Rebecca's death from pancreatic cancer. Sarah read the article 3 times, each reading hitting her harder than the last. The man who had fixed her car Euro, asking for nothing, grateful for a sandwich Euro, was a widower raising a child alone, a brilliant engineer who had sacrificed his career for his daughter. The article mentioned financial struggles, the difficulty of balancing childcare with sporadic work, and Emma's resilience in the face of losing her mother. Professional curiosity and something deeper Euro, a recognition of profound injustice Euro, made Sarah's mind race. Meridian Motors was currently expanding their electric vehicle division, struggling desperately to find experienced engineers who understood both the technical challenges and the industry landscape. The company's new flexible work initiative, a program that Sarah herself had championed for 18 months before finally getting board approval, was designed specifically for talented professionals who needed accommodations for childcare or other life circumstances. Mike Reynolds was exactly the kind of person the program was meant to help. More than that, he was exactly the talent Meridian Motors needed. And he had literally fallen into Sarah's lap euro, or rather, she had broken down in front of him a euro, like some kind of cosmic intervention. Before she could second-guess herself, before the rational, cautious part of her brain could list all the reasons this was inappropriate or presumptuous, Sarah made a decision. She would visit Mike Reynolds the next day with a proposition that might change both their lives. It was irregular, certainly. It bypassed normal hiring protocols. But sometimes the best opportunities came from unexpected places, and Sarah had learned to trust her instincts about people. The next morning, Sarah drove to Oakwood Gardens, her BMW running smoothly thanks to Mike's skilled repairs. The apartment complex was tired but clean, clearly housing working-class families who took pride in their modest homes. Children's bikes leaned against walkways, small gardens struggled valiantly in patches of dirt, and the playground equipment, though old, had been recently painted. She found apartment 312 and knocked at 7:15 a.m., hoping she wasn't too early. Through the door, she heard a child voice, "Euro, I'll get it." Euro, followed by a deeper male voice saying, "Emma, wait, let me check first." The door opened to reveal Mike Reynolds, looking startled to see her. He wore jeans and a t-shirt, his feet bare, his hair slightly damp from a recent shower. Behind him, a small girl with dark hair and pigtails peered around his legs with unabashed curiosity. "Miss Matthews," Mike said, clearly shocked. "Sarah? This is unexpected. Is everything okay with your car?" "The car's perfect," Sarah assured him quickly. "Actually, I came here to talk to you about something else entirely. I hope I'm not intruding too early." The little girl stepped forward with the fearless confidence of a child who had been taught she was safe in her own home. "I'm Emma Reynolds," she announced proudly. "Are you Daddy's friend? You're really pretty. I like your coat." Sarah knelt to Emma's level, charmed immediately. "Thank you, Emma. That's very sweet. I'm Sarah. Your daddy helped me yesterday when my car broke down. He fixed it when nobody else would stop to help." Emma beamed with unmistakable pride, looking up at her father. "Daddy can fix anything," she declared with absolute certainty. "He used to build whole cars before Mommy went to heaven. He's really, really smart. The smartest in the whole world." An awkward silence followed, heavy with unspoken grief. Mike cleared his throat, his hand gentle on his daughter's shoulder. "Emma, sweetheart, grab your lunchbox from the fridge, okay? We need to head to school soon." He turned to Sarah with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but Emma's school starts at 8 o'clock, and we have a routine. Is this something that can wait, or—" "Actually," Sarah interrupted gently, "would you mind if I walked with you? I promise I won't take much of your time, but I have a proposition I'd really like to discuss." Mike studied her face, clearly trying to assess whether she was serious or if this was some kind of strange social call. Finally, he nodded. "Emma, get your backpack," he called into the apartment. "Sarah's going to walk to school with us this morning." They left the apartment together, Emma skipping ahead with the uncontainable energy of an 8-year-old, occasionally turning to study Sarah with frank curiosity. Once Emma was far enough ahead to be out of easy earshot, Sarah began. "I did some research last night," she said, watching Mike's profile carefully for his reaction. "I hope you don't think that's invasive, but it's part of what I do professionally, Euro, finding talented people and connecting them with opportunities. I discovered that you were a senior mechanical engineer at Continental Automotive, that you have multiple patents to your name, that you were on track to become a department head before you left 3 years ago." Mike's jaw tightened, and his stride faltered almost imperceptibly. "That was another lifetime," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning note that suggested this wasn't a topic he discussed lightly. Sarah pressed on gently, but persistently. "Meridian Motors is currently expanding our electric vehicle division. We're struggling desperately to find experienced engineers who understand both the technical challenges and the industry landscape. After seeing your work yesterday, Euro, the way you diagnosed a problem, the efficiency of your repairs, the depth of your knowledge, Euro, I'm convinced you'd be perfect for a leadership role in our new program." They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Emma waved at them from the school gates just down the block, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. Mike turned to Sarah, and she saw in his eyes a complex mixture of emocionciero, longing, frustration, sadness, and something that might have been anger. Miss Mathizero, Sarayuro, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I really do, Mike said, his voice low and intense. But I left that world for a reason. A very good reason. He looked toward Emma, who was now chatting with a friend near the school entrance. My wife Rebecca died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast and brutal and gave us almost no time to prepare. Emma was 5 years old. The light changed, but they didn't move. Sarah waited, sensing that Mike needed to finish his story. Continental demanded 60 to 70-hour weeks, frequent travel, nights, and weekends. I was good at Euro. I loved it, honestly Euro, but Emma needed me. She had just lost her mother. She was having nightmares, struggling in school, couldn't be left with sitters without hysterical crying. I couldn't be the father Emma needed and the engineer Continental wanted. So I chose my daughter. I'd make the same choice again tomorrow, without hesitation. They crossed the street and stopped at the school gates. Emma ran over, giving her father a fierce hug around the waist. Love you, Daddy. Don't forget Euro field trip permission slip. Needs to be signed by Friday. I won't forget, sunshine, Mike assured her, kissing the top of her head. Have a good day. Learn something amazing. After Emma disappeared into the building with one final wave, Mike turned back to Sarah. I understand what you're offering, and I'm grateful, truly. But I can't go back to that life. I won't sacrifice Emma's childhood and stability for career advancement, no matter how appealing the position sounds. Sarah met his gaze steadily, prepared for this exact objection. What if you didn't have to choose? What if you could have Boteuro, meaningful work that uses your talents and flexibility that puts Emma first always? Mike looked skeptical. That doesn't exist in the corporate world. I've been there. I know how it works. It does at Meridian now, Sarah insisted. I spent 18 months developing and pushing through a flexible work program specifically designed for talented professionals who need accommodations for childcare or other life circumstances. You could work partially from home Euro, say, 3 days in the office, 2 days remote. Core hours will be something like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., allowing you to handle school drop-off and pickup. Emergency time off for sick kids or school events would never be questioned. You'd have full benefits, including health care that would start immediately. She pulled out her phone and showed him the official policy document. This isn't me making promises I can't keep. This is company policy, board-approved, already being implemented with several employees. You'd be joining an existing program, not being some kind of test case. Mike read the policy document, and Sarah saw hope beginning to war with his protective instincts. Why would you do this? He asked finally. You don't even know me beyond 2 hours fixing your car. Because I recognize talent when I see it, Sarah replied with complete honesty. Because our company desperately needs someone with your exact skill set and experience. And because yesterday you spent 2 hours helping a complete stranger and asked for nothing in return except a sandwich. That tells me more about your character than any background check or reference letter ever could. They had been standing outside the school for several minutes, and other parents were beginning to glance at them curiously. Mike seemed to notice and started walking back toward his apartment complex, Sarah falling in his step beside him. I can't make any promises, Mike said finally, his voice cautious but thoughtful. I need to think about it, talk to Emma, understand exactly what the role would entail, and whether I could actually make it work without compromising her stability. Sarah's smile was brilliant with relief and excitement. That's all I'm asking Euro, that you consider it seriously. How about a proper interview tomorrow? 10 a.m. at Meridian headquarters. No commitment, just a conversation about possibilities. Mike stopped walking and studied her face, searching for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate prank or misguided charity. Finding only genuine enthusiasm and professional respect, he finally nodded. Okay, one interview. But Sarah, I need you to understand Euro. If at any point I think this job would harm Emma or our life together, I'm walking away. She comes first. Always. I wouldn't respect you if she didn't, Sarah replied simply. She handed him another business card, this one with her direct line and cell phone written on the back. I'll email you the details this afternoon. And Mike, thank you for giving this a chance. I have a feeling this could be good for everyone involved. As Sarah walked back to her car, she felt an unfamiliar sense of excitement that had nothing to do with corporate advancement or personal achievement. She had the distinct feeling she had just set in motion something important, something that went beyond filling a position on an organizational chart. She had met someone genuinely good Euro, a rarity in her experience Euro, and might actually be able to help him while also helping her company. It felt like the universe had aligned in an unexpected but perfect way. That evening, Emma's reaction to the news was immediate and unequivocal. Mike had waited until after dinner, after homework was finished and she was in her pajamas, to explain about Sarah's visit and the job offer. "You have to take it, Dad," Emma exclaimed, bouncing on the couch with excitement that made her pigtails dance. "You'll get to build cars again like you used to. And Miss Sarah said we could get a bigger apartment someday, right? I could have my own room with purple walls like I've always wanted." Mike laughed, surprised and touched by her immediate enthusiasm. "Slow down, sunshine. It's just an interview. Nothing's definite. And where did you get the idea about a bigger apartment?" "I didn't say anything about that." Emma's expression turned Euro so much like her mother's that it made Mike's heart physically ache. "But Daddy, you'd be happier, right? You always look so sad when you come home from fixing people's toilets and stuff. I hear you sometimes at night, doing those engineering problems in your notebooks. You miss it, don't you?" Out of the mouths of babes, Mike thought, stunned. He hadn't realized his 8-year-old daughter had been so aware of his dissatisfaction, his quiet grief for the career he'd left behind. He pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "How did you get so smart?" he asked softly. "I got it from you," Emma replied with perfect confidence. "And from Mommy. She told me once, before she got really sick, that you were the smartest person she ever met. She said you could build anything if you had enough time and the right tools." Mike felt tears prick his Euro, a sensation that still caught him off guard even 3 years after Rebecca's death. "Your mom was pretty amazing herself," he managed. "I know," Emma said simply. "She wanted to take this job, Daddy. I know she would. She always said you had a gift, and that gift shouldn't be wasted." The wisdom of his daughter, spoken with such certainty, made Mike's decision for him. He would go to the interview with an open mind. He would honestly assess whether this opportunity could work for both of them, and if it felt right Euro, if he could truly balance meaningful work with being the present, engaged father Emma Euro, then maybe, just maybe, he would take a chance on reclaiming part of the life he thought he'd lost forever. The next morning, Mike stood in front of his small bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie he had borrowed from his neighbor, Mr. Peterson. The suit was his own Euro, the same one he'd worn to Rebecca's funeral and hadn't touched since. It still fit, though perhaps a bit looser than before. 3 years of financial stress had a way of keeping weight off. Emma appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her school uniform, her backpack ready. "You look really handsome, Daddy," she said with a shy smile. "Like a prince in one of my books." Mike turned to her, kneeling so they were eye level. "Listen, Sunshine, I need you to understand something. This interview might not lead to anything. The job might not work out. I don't want you to get your hopes up too high, okay?" Emma placed her small hands on either side of his face, a gesture so reminiscent of Rebecca that Mike's breath caught. "It's going to be great, Daddy. I have a good feeling. Mommy used to say that when you have a good feeling about something, you should listen to it." Mike hugged her tightly, drawing strength from his daughter's unshakable faith. "When did you become the wise one in this family?" "I've always been the wise one," Emma replied with exaggerated dignity. "You just didn't notice because I'm short." They both laughed, and Mike felt some of his anxiety ease. Whatever happened today, he had Emma. That was what really mattered. The Meridian Motors headquarters was even more impressive in person than it had looked in photographs. The building stretched 30 stories into the sky, all glass and steel and modern architecture that screamed success and innovation. Mike felt simultaneously inspired and intimidated as he passed through security, receiving a visitor badge and directions to the 14th floor. Sarah met him in the lobby at exactly 10 a.m., professional, but with a warmth that immediately helped settle his nerves. She wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than 2 months of his current rent, but her smile was genuine and encouraging. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes searching his face for signs of hesitation or doubt. Mike took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be. Though I have to admit, I'm more nervous about this than I expected to be." "That's completely normal," Sarah assured him as they walked toward the elevators. "But you should know, Euro, the team is genuinely excited to meet you. I showed your resume to our CTO, and he actually said, and I quote, 'Where has this guy been hiding?'" The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt both too fast and too slow. When the doors opened, Sarah led Mike through a maze of modern office spaces, Euro, open concept areas with collaborative workstations, private offices with glass walls, and casual meeting spaces that looked more like coffee shops than corporate environments. They arrived at a large conference room with a wall of windows overlooking the city. Inside, for people waited, a man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes who Sarah introduced as Robert Shun, the engineering director, a younger woman in trendy glasses named Dr. Jennifer Park, the chief technology officer, and 2 project managers named Thomas and Maria. The interview began with standard questions: Euro, Mike's educational background, his work history, his specific technical expertise. But as the conversation progressed, Mike found himself relaxing into the familiar language of engineering challenges and innovative solutions. These were his people, Euro, professionals who spoke his language, who understood the intricate dance between theoretical possibility and practical application. "What innovations do you see as most critical for the next generation of electric vehicles?" Dr. Park asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Without thinking, Mike stood and approached the whiteboard mounted on the conference room wall. "May I?" he asked, picking up a marker. At the nods of permission, Mike began sketching a redesigned battery configuration he had been developing during late nights after Emma was asleep, Euro, a project he'd worked on purely for his own intellectual satisfaction, with no expectation of ever implementing it. As he explained the concept, detailing how improved thermal management could increase both battery life and charging efficiency, the room grew quiet. When Mike finished and turned back to face the panel, he found them staring at him with expressions ranging from surprise to excitement. Robert Shun, the engineering director, actually stood Euro, something that Sarah later told Mike was unprecedented during an interview. "That's remarkably similar to a problem we've been trying to solve for 6 months, Shun said slowly, approaching the whiteboard to study Mike's sketches more closely. "We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on consultants and haven't arrived at a solution this elegant. You developed this while working independently." Mike nodded, suddenly self-conscious about his enthusiasm. "It was more of a thought experiment, really. I still keep up with industry journals when I can afford them, and I've been following the challenges with thermal runaway and high-capacity lithium-ion batteries. I couldn't stop thinking about possible solutions, so I started sketching ideas. It became kind of a hobby, Euro, something to occupy my mind after my daughter goes to sleep." Dr. Park pulled out her phone and took several photos of the whiteboard. "Would you mind if I share this with our battery research team? This configuration addresses several issues we've been struggling with simultaneously." "Of course," Mike said, feeling a flutter of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. This was what he had missed to Euro, the intellectual challenge, the collaborative problem-solving, the satisfaction of applying his knowledge to real-world problems that mattered. The interview continued, but the tone had fundamentally shifted from evaluation to enthusiastic collaboration. The panel asked increasingly technical questions, and Mike found himself engaged in the kind of stimulating debate he had thought he'd left behind forever. They discussed materials science, production scalability, cost-benefit analysis, and regulatory challenges. Thomas, one of the project managers, pulled up current project specifications on his laptop, and soon the entire team was gathered around the conference table, brainstorming solutions to problems Mike had just been introduced to. 2 hours flew by like minutes. When Sarah finally glanced at her watch and reluctantly interrupted the discussion, Mike was startled to realize how much time had passed. He needed to pick up Emma from school in 45 minutes. "I'm sorry to break this up," Sarah said with an apologetic smile. But I think we should let Mike get to his daughter's school. Though I have to say, I've never seen a more productive interview in my 15 years in HR. The panel members stood, each shaking Mike's hand with genuine warmth. This has been extraordinary, Robert Chun said seriously. We have a few more candidates scheduled, but I think I speak for everyone when I say we're incredibly impressed. Dr. Park nodded enthusiastically. I'd like to invite you back for a second interview with our full engineering team. When next week work, Mike felt overwhelmed by their positive reception, but tried to maintain realistic expectations. I'm definitely interested in continuing the conversation. Just let me check my schedule. He pulled out his worn day, Planner Euro, a far cry from the digital calendars everyone else in the room undoubtedly you see to Euro, and they settled on the following Wednesday.